Okay, we'll continue where we stopped. So far we have discussed the title, the abstract, and how to create effective and good keywords. Now moving on to introduction, and again the same thing. We are going to only discuss the principles, which are almost the same whether you are writing a research article, a research dissertation, a research report, or a dissertation, or a thesis. So the principles they remain the same. So considering that, we'll move forward, and now I'm going to discuss the introduction. So introduction is actually the first major part or chunk of the actual research work that you want to publish or you want to submit as a part of your dissertation or thesis. Because we discussed last time that there are four important components. The first is introduction, the second is material and method, the third is result, and the last one is discussion. So we'll discuss the introduction first. So how to write, again, couple of tips that might help you write a good introduction for your dissertation or for your research article. Okay. So again, you need to understand that there are two important things that must be mentioned in the introduction section in order for the introduction section to pass or fail. You can generally divide them into two. The first is the background information, and the second is the purpose, aims, and objective of the study. And again, going back to the lecture that we on protocol writing, now you would realize that if you have created a good protocol in the first place, it will be very easy for you to write a good dissertation or an article out of that, because the outline and the background and the literature search is already in front of you. And now all you need to do is actually to formally write it down in a specific form. So when you are about to write introduction, you need to mention two things. Number one is the background information, which includes that what have others done in the past. And for this, you have to provide evidence supported by a limited number of relevant references. So again, whenever you write something, you have to link your research with the research done in the past. We have already discussed this thing earlier, that in a sense, like no research in the world is actually a no research in the world can be considered a truly original or unique research, because whatever you do is actually linked to the research, or part of it has been done or conducted in the past already by your seniors or your colleagues or people based in other parts of the world. So it's very important that whenever you write an introduction, you try to link your research with the research done in the past. So for example, let's say you are doing a research on maybe management or some physiotherapy management of hemiplegic shoulder pain. So you might want to give a little bit of reference that what is stroke, what is the incidence of hemiplegic shoulder pain based on the studies that have been already published in the past. Then you might want to just narrate or just want to give a couple of quick options of management strategies of hemiplegic shoulder pain. And for that, you have to give certain number of references. But important thing to understand is that please do not use too many references in the introduction section. And it is absolutely important once you're writing an original research article for a biomedical journal. Because in case of an original research article, many a times there are certain limits on the number of references that you can use. So usually it varies between 25 to 35. So different biomedical journals, they allow you different limitations on on the number of references that you can use for an original research article. Usually it varies from 25 to 35. If this is the case, a general rule of thumb is that you should not use more than 1/3 of your reference limit in the introduction section. So for example, if your limit is 25, please do not use 16 to 20 references right in the introduction section, because then how many references you will be left behind for your discussion part and for your literature search. So please, as a general rule of thumb, it's not a hard and fast rule, but it's just you can say a tip or a trick from a senior colleague of mine, that whenever you are writing an original research article, the number of the references for the introduction section should not be more than 1/3 of the total limit allowed to you. This can vary in case of a research dissertation and thesis, because usually in case of a thesis or dissertation, you don't have a limit on the number of references that you can use, or the limit is like somewhere between 100 and 120 references. And then you can actually use 20 to 25 references right in the introduction section. The second thing you need to understand is that your introduction, whether you are writing an introduction for your research article, for your research report, for your dissertation or thesis, it must end with the purpose, aims, or objective of the study, which means you have to explain that why are you doing this research and what is so different or special about your research that people should actually give some importance and read the whole article. So again, first of all, you give a little bit of background. You try to connect your research with the research done in the past, and then you try to explain why your research is important and what is so different or special about your research. And the common example that I usually give here is actually, again, the demographics of cerebral palsy in Pakistan. Now, if you go in the literature, you would actually find dozens of articles, which describe the demographic or the clinical pattern of cerebral palsy in different countries of the world, specifically in the US, in the UK, Europe, and Australia. Now, these are large registries and large cohort of patients. So you might actually read an article or dissertation which describes the pattern of cerebral palsy in 20,000 patients from a particular developed country. Now the question arises that would it be appropriate if you start doing a research on the demographic pattern of, let's say, a 500 cerebral palsy patient from Karachi, a study from 3 centers? Would it make any difference? Now somebody might want to say, no, it won't make any difference because data of around 20,000 cerebral palsy patients is already available in the world. But you need to understand, if you can justify your research, if you can justify and you can present why your study is important and how it is connected to the previous studies, it's going to make sense. So for example, in the same example, you might want to start off with cerebral palsy is defined as, and you give the official definition of cerebral palsy. And then you might want to say that the demographic and the epidemiological pattern of cerebral palsy is well documented in the developed part of the world. And then you can always give like 4 or 5 references. And then you might want to say that the demographics and clinical features of cerebral palsy have not been well studied in the lower middle income countries, specifically Pakistan. And this study is the first study which documents the demographics of spastic cerebral palsy from 3 different centers of Karachi over a time period of 2 years. Now you have actually justified that why your research is important, and it is going to help you ultimately publish your research and get your dissertation accepted. The common mistake that people usually make in the introduction section, they include number 1 is overlong and rambling introduction section. जिसे वो कहते हैं ना कि नील के साहिल से लेकर ताबहा के काशगर और उसके बाद भी आपका घोड़ा दौड़ता ही रहता है. You have to stop somewhere, and you need to understand that there are limitations on how you write an introduction. So your introduction should be focused. It should be connected to the research done in the past, and it should clearly state an aim and objective of the study, and that should be all. Do not go in details and do not start describing every intervention. Do not start describing everything in detail. This is not the place for literature review. This is only introduction. Again, the same thing that I have already explained, that some people, they give extensive number of references right in the introduction section. Please don't do that. And as a matter of principle, try to limit the number of references in the introduction section to 1/3 of the total limit of references allowed for that particular article. If you miss your important previous work regarding that research, you have done a mistake. So for example, let's take an example. Okay. So somebody is writing an article, let's say on genetics, right? And he or she does not refer the famous article by Watson and Crick on the helical structure of DNA that was published back in 1950s. So again, it's an old article, but that was the article that actually changed the face of genetics for the times to come. So it's a very important seminal article. So it's an important part of information on genetics. So you have to mention that. Same goes for example, you are trying to describe any physiotherapy intervention for a particular disease, and you do not mention the first time that physiotherapy technique was discovered or that was described in the literature. So you have missed a very important previous work and it will not work. So please do not miss out on the important previous work, even if it means that you have to reference and quote an old article. Then if your objectives, aims of the study are not clearly stated at the end of the introduction section, it will be very difficult for the editor, for the reviewer, and for the reader to understand that why did you conduct this research in the first place. So your objective, rationale, aims, objective should be clearly stated at the end of the introduction section. Again, you do not please do not mention any kind of data that you are reporting in the introduction section. The place for that is either in the methodology or in the result section. But people do make these mistakes and you should avoid them.